To round off this session, we have Mose Jacobs. Mose is a writer, she's a performer and a journalist, and she's the co-organizer of DeBarra Spoken Word. Mose published a 24th century graphic novel, Terra to Titan, in 2019 in collaboration with a Dutch illustrator who lives in Berlin. And I've seen that particular publication. I had a copy that I gave away as a present, and it was a wonderfully produced book. And poetry and music are Mose's passions. So Mose, you're muted.
Oh shit. Thank you very much, Margaret. I said poetry and music keep me sane, sort of. And I think that's how I regard myself at the moment, sane, sort of, with lots of ups and downs in this wonderful and challenging time. I'm a bit hesitant about speaking here because I think well, of course there is loss in my background, because I think there is loss in everybody's background in a moderate, muted way, and maybe we would do well looking at that a bit more. Today I looked at the synopsis of the film Frozen, and I am ashamed to say that I've never seen it. It's a Walt Disney film, and I thought it was just a Walt Disney film, but it is actually a film about shame and about people freezing. I've recently started a therapy which is called Internal Family Systems, and it's based on the fact that we are not monoliths. We consist of different parts, and I've long felt that, but I've now also found a way of looking at the different parts of me, or I'm beginning to find that way, and I find that very beneficial and helpful. There is a video on YouTube. It's called The Still-Faced Experiment. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's a mother playing with a small, there's a couple of them, but mothers play with a small baby or with a toddler, and they're really engaged with them, and the baby is loving it and is responding, and they mirror each other, and it's really the best way you can play with babies, in a very natural way. But because it's an experiment, she has been asked to stop for about 2 minutes and to turn a still, unresponsive face towards the baby. And what you see then is that the baby first tries to get back what he or she just had and reaches out and waves their arms and gurgles. But when that doesn't work, they get really upset and they withdraw. In a way, they freeze. And of course, in this experiment, everything ends happily because the mother returns to the baby and holds it, and then the baby is happy again. And that's maybe even a educational experience. But I think, well, I discovered at some point that when I was born, my mother didn't really engage with me, and that's, in a way, that's a very minor thing. When she was 80, she told me that when she was 5, she had been sexually abused in a park, taken behind the bushes. And I'll never know if this is really true or my speculation, but I sort of link those two events. I think for her birth, she was a dancer and a very physical person, but she was very frozen. She was like a snow queen. She was a beautiful woman who didn't really engage with me later, although I knew she loved me. And I am now looking at my own baby photos, and I see an ugly, an ugly little baby. I know it's not ugly. Margaret is shaking her head, and I know that. But that was my first impression, because I see how I have withdrawn. But thanks to the therapy I'm engaging in, self-therapy as well, I now know that there is one way of dealing with this. I think we have loads of little kids in ourselves and little toddlers and kids that have been rejected at a certain way. Because if somebody rejects you, it could be because you'd think as the subject of the rejection, you think it's you think you're unworthy, you think you're unlovable, you think you're disliked, but it could be somebody who cannot engage, somebody who is frozen, somebody who's had their own parents being unable to engage. And that's what I'm learning. So I'm also learning to embrace that part of me with what I now call my real self inside. Not to think, oh, that's an ugly little baby, but to think I'm starting to see that little baby differently, and I'm beginning to love it as well. I see its vulnerability, and I think that's a very useful way of interacting with parts of ourselves that have been rejected or abandoned or much worse. You know, there's loads of horrible things, but we can within ourselves give love to every part of ourselves. Maybe, well, the hope is that then eventually we will be full of self-love and self-compassion. But even if we have more love and more compassion, we're more able to share that with others as well. Well, I think that's all I want to share for the moment. But to me, it's like a journey of discovery. I totally love the radical acceptance of how things are, but as for myself, I always want change, and that's my driving motivation, to change. And, you know, it's also a collective thing. I discovered this method when I was looking at the webinar about collective trauma, about Austria. There's an Austrian guy, and he's discovered that there's lots of trauma remained after the Second World War. You know, even though Austria might have been one of the guilty countries, but the people there have been traumatized. And I think that's also very true of Ireland. You know, colonialization, famine, whatever, it leaves its marks poverties. And we have to look at that and try and deal with it in the only way that we know. I mean, tears are great. I totally agree with Nick. I cry a lot, but, you know, allowing yourself to love is also very important. Amen.
Lovely, Mose. It's really, really nice to think about that, because sometimes we don't love ourselves enough. And if you don't love yourself, who else is going to, you're not going to put yourself out there to be loved by anybody else.
Yeah.
Maybe. So it's a lovely thought and a lovely aspiration, and it should be taken on board by everyone. I think it will be. Now,